This video I'm going to show you how I wove the seat on this Jenny Alexander style ladderback chair. And the chair is made of white oak and hickory, and the seat is the inner bark of the hickory tree. This is a piece of it here that's been soaked this afternoon and is very pliable, and that's the condition that you weave the seat with it. And then as it dries out, it just becomes as strong and durable a seat as you can get. To harvest the material, I don't have video of that process. I did that back in the spring of this year with my friend Brendan Gaffney. And the two of us spent 2 full days shaving hickory with not a moment to spare for photography or video or anything. So to see that process, there are step-by-step photos and a description in the 3rd edition of Make a Chair from a Tree that we worked on after Jenny's death. It was published just recently by Lost Art Press. So you can refer there to how to harvest the bark or search it on the web. But you harvest it in the spring. I don't know where you can buy hickory bark commercially. It's such a labor-intensive product that it's rarely available for sale. But the video will show you how to use it and how to weave that seat. So this strip of bark is thick enough that I think I can split it in half, or I'm going to try. And to give you an idea of how thick, I've tried to measure it, and I don't have the eyes or the tools to accurately measure this, but I think it's about 2.5/16 of an inch. And so the reason it's that thick is that it's easier to it's faster to get a lot of them off the log with less shaving. But while it's on the log that's the best chance you have at shaving it evenly, but it just goes more slowly if you're getting each strip to its finished thickness. So what I'm doing there is just scoring across it with the point of the knife, just part way through the piece of bark, and then peeling it like that to open it up. So I just hold the knife sort of like a pencil and just score across the bark, about trying to get halfway through its thickness, and then can bend that back and get that piece right there. So that begins the split with which I can then divide that piece of bark. So I'll show you how that goes. At this stage, it's a process that you have to watch the whole time. So I've sort of got it somewhat between my knees, but all the action is happening in my fingertips. I've got these fingers down on the bottom of down lower on the strip, and then my thumbs and forefingers are pulling it apart. And already what's happening is that this one's getting thin, and the split has run off this edge. So I'm going to go right in there just with the tip of the knife to try to just pick that split back up there, get it back to full width, and then just peel it some more. So I'm getting some voids in the top half. First thing is, that's the one I want. The inside portion of it is the better strip, in my taste anyway. And if this one becomes a strip, then that's a good thing. If it becomes trash, that's fine. What I'm after is weaving a seat in this full thickness material is too awkward and difficult, and it doesn't make the best seat. A little bit thinner is actually a better seat. So I need to try get this bit back, just like I did a moment ago. It wants to run off that way. And I'm also going to try to shave that little mark there to try to pick that up. So I grab those in my left thumb, with my left thumb, and there have the strip running back the way I want it for a minute. So if you have the hang of splitting wood with a froe, this is similar in that you need to pull on the thicker part to direct this split. And if this strip is 25 feet long or more, I'm going to be here for a few minutes. So that I want to just shave right like that. And it wants to do it again. So you're always watching, as you are in any splitting process, what's going on. Like that. And sometimes these fibers lift up, and I try to bring them to whichever piece they come off of, try to reconnect them. This bark was soaking for about an hour, which might have been too long, but you want it nice and pliable and supple to do this work. See, there it's tearing again. So I'll just come back behind that a little bit and then try to grab that in my left hand. So that's the piece that was ripping, so I pared it back a little. Got it back on track. There's always some variation in the thickness. So you want to try to keep the one you're keeping, in this case the one on my right hand, an even thickness, and let the variation go into that secondary strip. It's not always possible. And there I have another spot to pare back a little. So those shreds I'm putting back over here. This piece has been coiled for a few months, and as I said, then soaked in water this morning. So there's a little knot which I won't try to cut away in here, just be a little bump in the piece. It's a void in that section. And if I end up using this strip of bark, that hole is fine. It might get covered, it might be on the underside of the seat, but even if it's on the top side, it's not fatal. A bigger hole would be a bigger problem. I'm coming to a different problem here. And that's a rip in the strip of the bark from when we cut it off the tree. So I want to fare that out before I try to divide that. I don't know if that's showing up. So I've got a pair of scissors here, and I'll just recut the width of the strip right there. Cut that away. A little shred of it still. And that'll affect the split. I'd rather the strip get narrow there for a bit. Because it can hopefully be hidden in the weaving. Might be the strip's a little wide otherwise anyway. What is that? Yeah, at the narrow part it's 1 inch. Back here it's 1 1/4 inches. That's too wide. But this is really just comes under the preparation of the material still. You can do this the day you take it off the tree, or a year later, as in this case 3 months later. Once you get it off the tree and get it successfully dried, it'll last for decades. And then to get it ready for use, you just soak it a bit. And sometimes, just like in splitting wood, you can have one edge that's thick and one edge that's thin. So you got to try to watch that as well. So I've been looking at this edge of the strip, but that edge right here got a little off kilter. And I want to try to rectify that. And maybe halfway through the length of this strip now. Well, that was a long run without a without any adjustment. But here I need to just nip a little of that, get back onto my left hand side there, like that. I should tell you that this is exceptional bark. I cut this in the spring with my friend Brendan, and he had selected some saplings that were 30 feet before the branches and nice and straight. So some of the best bark, it is the best bark I've ever got. So unfortunately, you can't buy it, bark of this quality, at least not right now. You can't. And it's funny, all the years I did this with Alexander didn't divide bark like this. I must have learned this from Drew and Louise Langsner. Alexander would just shave it thin on the sapling. There. So that's the strip ready to go on the chair. Once I trim the width of it, I'll start to weave with it. It's got some weird wide parts that it doesn't need. Nice. I just use a pair of scissors to even out the width a bit. And I'm not terribly fastidious about it. Not going to measure it or mark it. Do it all by eye. Sometimes from the underside like this. Mostly from the top, from the part I'm going to see. And it can tolerate some wiggle to it. Here I can see there's a bulge here where we cut it on the tree. So I'll just try to take a little of that off like that. And same thing happening right here, so I'll fair that off and cut this bulge here. Might even still be too wide. I just measured this strip and it's 30 feet. Which is just about perfect. Tried to run that out a bit again because I wanted to trim a little off the other edge. Right here, this edge starts to swell. So the side we're looking at now is the one that was attached to the log. And this is the one that was towards the bark. So that will be what we see in the seat. Now I know a little further up here I have these strips that are stuck on the left-hand edge of my piece of bark, so I'll flip it over and try to make my corrections there to get rid of almost. To get rid of that. So another bulge here, and you can survive with a lot of variation in there. I'm probably being too fussy right now. This bark is still very flexible. It's been out of the water for a while now, half an hour, and still very workable. Depending on the weather, you want to watch it. If it gets too dry, it can crack as you're working it. All right. So all that for my one strip to start the weaving with. Let me clean up and get set up, and I'll show you how to put it on the chair. To put the first strip on, I just clamp the chair to a low bench just to keep it steady, and I drop the coiled strip inside the chair there, and I have taken a pair of scissors and narrowed down the end of it, and it'll go around the back rung and get tied to it. Like that. And tucked over to my left corner. It doesn't need to be left, could be right. That's just how I do it. And then I pull the strip under the front rung. So the strip is, this is the inside of the bark here. And it comes under the front rung and then over to the back. And you pull it and wrap it right over where it was bound to that back rung. And then come again. So this begins the warp, the initial part of the seed. And I'm not pulling this super tight, but I'm not leaving it really loose and baggy either. Some people put a cushion, padding inside even a bark seed. I never have. I have one of Alexander's that was padded. I don't really see the need for it. But the seed will, over time, sort of sag a bit. I kind of like that. But if you don't like that, you can go ahead and put a cushion of some type in here. Foam cushion is going to show. So you want it sort of, a white foam cushion is going to show. You want it somehow disguised. And you'd have to talk to somebody else about that because I don't know how to do it. So I'm just winding that front to back and just giving it a little tug as I come. Now, the very first strip came off of that back rung. Well, it came from here under the front rung, but it is not tucked up against the post. You want it running 90 degrees to the back and the front rungs. Just going to fill in a rectangular portion here, not a flared one. We'll weave extra strips in there after the fact. Not we, me. I will weave them. You'll watch until it's your turn. And I'm just trying to tuck these side by side as I go. So taking up a little slack there, giving them a push that away. Well, the coil came undone, but I'm nearing the end of the coil anyway. What's it going to do? Am I going to reach? Yes. That is perfect. That strip will stop right under there, but I've filled in the back rung. So that last strand just passed that back rung and has about 4 inches pulling underneath. So I'm just going to clamp it right to itself with one of these little spring clamps, and can just leave it like that. I don't need to tie it off. I'm going to now add a strip going across where the actual weaving will begin, and in the end it will capture that end of that strip, and when it dries it won't be able to come undone. So I've got an imbalance here. I have more space on my left than on my right, and I'll just try to knock these over a little bit. Like that. There we go. So that's the warp, and I'll get a strip ready to do the weft. Now, if you don't have long enough strips of bark to do the whole warp in one piece, you can join them together a couple different ways. The one that I learned from Alexander, that is in the first edition, it's in I think both editions of the book, is just to narrow down the ends of your old strip and the new one and tie them together. So we used a little loop like that and then wind around that under itself and then back through that loop and then pull them together. And that's how I've done them for a zillion years, and then you can really get that nice so that it's connected and not going to go anywhere. You do this, of course, underneath the seam, and then carry on. But I've taken lately to do a different way, cut an arrow lock on the 2 strips with a chisel. So I'll set up at the bench and show you how I cut that. Another way to join 2 strips of bark to continue your weaving is with an arrow lock, which is what this is. And I'll show you how I cut it. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of fun. It's less bulky than the joining 2 strips with a knot. When you've got them under the seat, the knot gets a little more 3-dimensional and has these strands. Those get snipped off, but you have to leave some of them there, like that. And so if you don't want to use that, you can try this joint, and it's just a triangular opening cut in one piece of bark. I do that with a chisel, about half the width of the bark, and just press the chisel in centered on the strip. And then I keep fiddling around with different sizes, so a wider chisel to make the other parts of your triangle, like that. You want it not too close to the end of the strip, because if you're up closer you run the risk of it just breaking open. So now to make the other part of that notch, or of that lock, I tend to lay that on there and scribe that line. And that line is not what I'm cutting. And I can't see a damn thing there, but I'm cutting to the sides of that line, back like that. I'll cut it a little narrower. And then you can either use a chisel or your knife to slice that business. So you want that neck to be just less than that opening, and my neck is probably still too wide. I'm going to take a little off of there. And likewise you can taper the width of it. And at this stage it's thicker than I need it, and I want to be able to bend it a lot. So for that I try to thin it down with the tip of the slide knife. It's funny, as I said, I've always used tying a knot, and I've known about this method a long time and used it in other work, but never used it in a bark seat until recently. So 40 years along, and then decide another way. So if the bark still has enough moisture in it, you can bend it without cracking it. And you just feed it through like that, and then underneath flatten it back out and pull it down like that, and that's your arrow joint, like that. So I'm ready to begin the next weaving, and now I've taken the chair off the bench because I need to flip it over all the time to weave the top and the bottom. I've tied a strip to the side rung near the back, same as when I started in the beginning, and I flipped the chair upside down, and this strip is shorter. I had to trim its length because of a defect, so I will have to have a joint at some point. So I'll weave this over those first two strips, under the next two, and go across here, going over two, under two, like that. And then once that's fed through, it's just a matter of passing it like that, pulling it a bit snug, and flipping it over, and whoops, and doing the same thing there. So I'll start over these two on my left. Somehow I got turned around. I usually weave that way. Must be just prepping for the camera and such. Lost track of where I was. And just like I did before, I pull that a little snug and wrap it right over where my knot was. Now I come under and I'll go just over one to begin with. And remember, that's that short one, and then under the next two. So it staggers that weaving there. It's over under two after the very beginning there. Like that. Pull it a bit. And back on the top. Now I'll go, I went over two in the beginning, I'll go over one, and then under two, over two, across. Like that. And try to push them toward the back as I work. Holding that one up. I got under the seat. That's funny. It somehow, I wove it down to underneath the bottom. So there's the second strip on the top, and I come back to the bottom of the chair, and now on the third row I go under the first two. You can take that clip off now, it's not doing anything, and then over to so it alternates two everywhere except the initial piece you start at, and sometimes over here as a result, but you just have to keep tracking your beginning. And you see, as I pull it to my right, I'm pushing it that way as well. Called packing it up a bit, like that. And then here on the top again. Now I've gone over two, over one, now I go under two. And it's easier to do this weaving down here where there's some slack, and then you move the strip up like that. Now row 4, I go just under one, which is that loose one. And then alternate two across like that. And two, so these two. Here I am, same row on the top of the seat. That one's under two, so this is under one. And then proceed as before. So it's just trying to keep that pattern. You gotta keep track of where you are, and the rest will take care of itself. Now here, where that strip runs out, I'm going over 2, so imagining that this one continues. And this will help create that herringbone or twill weave there. Now I'm reaching the end of this strip. Yeah, it'll just make it so I have enough here so that my joint will be underneath the seat. So now I'm back to the very first row, over 2. And I have to prepare the next strip of bark. A couple of things to keep in mind. Between when I wove that warp and when I began this, I had stopped, I had taken a break, was gone for half an hour or more. So these have begun to dry out and they're a little cupped. So I'm going to put a wet paper towel right on those to keep those moist a bit. And then I have the other end of this strip to finish preparing. It had got thin and I had to break it off when I was splitting it in half. So I'll show you what I do with the rest of that and go on from there. So the reason I had to cut this strip is because it was too, let me start over. The reason I had to cut this strip is because a section of it was too thin to divide, to split open. And this end is still thick enough, but it's at the other end that it's not. And another way to deal with bark that's too thick to weave with is to shave it at your shaving horse. To do that, I like to make it taut. So I put a clamp on this end and do that. And go at it not with the draw knife, but with a spoke shave. And it's slower than dividing it, than splitting it. The bark tends to gum up the blade of the spoke shave a lot. But it's a nice way to do it. I think I said the best place to trim the bark is on the tree. And this sort of mimics that in that I've got this extension stick, just a piece of scrap that I had in the shop, to support the bark. And you can lift it to gauge your progress. And then feed along the next section. This bark is behaving pretty nicely. I can try it without the clip, without clamping that free end. But you see what it jams up the spoke shave with these really stringy, wet, fibrous shavings. And this is pretty much just out of the water. I have a thin spot there, thinner right here than here. And I can see that by the pattern on it. Let me get you up closer so you can see that. This pattern these darker strands and then these crisscrossed lighter strands. As you're shaving the bark on the tree, you're watching that pattern emerge, and in the thicker parts it's much more bold. As you get thinner, like right there, the dark bits get narrower. So that's how I could see that that part of the bark right there is a thickness I like. So I don't want to be hitting that with my spoke shave right now. But this right adjacent to it is too abrupt a switch in the thickness. So this has to come down. I didn't take the time to sharpen this spoke shave today, and that wouldn't have hurt me any if I'd done so. It's pretty sharp, but it could always have been touched up. But I just have to get through this one strip, I think. There we are. Now, so back here, I don't really want to hit that at all. That's pretty much a thickness I can live with. And maybe for a bit of a run. Yeah. And that's why splitting it apart I gave up. I'm just going to lightly take a pass like that, in case this ends up on the top side of the seat. I don't want such a difference in the color right now. Those color differences are really only a problem when it's new. Over time it'll all sort of develop its own patina. So that's, yeah, see, that's a nice even thickness now. Whoops, what have I got? There's a long stretch there. It's a little thick right here. So I'm not going to change the color of that. There's going to be a dark stretch to it, I think. And so more and more of this for 15 more feet, and then I'll go back to weaving. When you're shaving this stuff with a spoke shave, these shavings aren't like wood shavings. They don't expel, they don't come through. They're just so soft and wet that they clog the blade no matter what. If I was shaving oak, I just used this spoke shave to make this chair, and this oak shavings come out the throat, and these things don't. So that's what I'm going to have to work with, and it's too good a piece of bark to discard. So I'll see what happens. Actually, it's the strip that's the brightest is the shortest part of it. But we'll see. We'll see. It'd be better if I hadn't started the seat and I could do the whole seat in dark patterned bark like that. Let me have a look at it. Well, I decided to go ahead and use that strip. I had soaked 3 and was hoping I could split the third one to get the similar color bark, but it wasn't thick enough, so it would be shaved like this one. And I decided to take my own advice and be patient and let the patina change over time. So here's that arrow lock, and you can sneak it in that way as well instead of folding that strip. If this is long enough, you can go like that and then just turn them, and there's that joint. So here comes the new strip. I have to come back to the end of it here. Now pick up my weaving, and that was over 2, so now over 1 under these 2. This is over that imaginary one, and because that strand ran out in the warp, and go all the way over to there. And as I'm pulling this along, I just want to watch for that joint and not drag it across these strips, because you don't want it to snag on anything there and break. Here it is. Like right there. So you just sneak under to bring it up there. And give it enough of a tug to make sure the weaving is taut, but don't yank with all your might. You just want to take up any slack like that. So that's the joint right there. And now I'm back to this weaving. And this row is over 1. So my end is a little ragged. Where'd my scissors go? Well, a knife. So over 1, and 2 and 2. And the further you go, the harder it gets to weave it in there. So this is over 2 and under 2. And what I could do is lay a strip of bark there to because there's room for it here. So I might grab an offcut of bark and do that next time I come under there. Under 2. So you just look at what you did before the previous row, and that dictates what you do on this row. And if you get stuck, you go back to your first 4, because that's how many it takes for the full pattern. This is a piece that I peeled off, so this is one of the top parts of the bark that I'm not using much on this. See? And where does this pick up? It goes under here. So there's that faux strip. It's not really part of the weaving, but it'll help me keep track of my pattern. No, because that's not how it goes. I did have a mistake, and it's because of that abbreviated warp. So I've just laid this in, and this goes nowhere, but it'll all get woven in. So I pulled out one row to redo, and over one. This goes under these two, and that's where I made the mistake, because I was weaving under an imaginary one and I missed it. There. Caught up again. Once things start to get a little tighter, I take a stick-up got here with a squared end and then a tapered end. The squared end is for pushing these to the back, but you don't want to buckle them, so you might have to nip that tapered end under there to get that, and you just sort of beat them, pack them in like that. Then when I'm weaving, I will sometimes use that stick to, I'm going over these two, I'm going under these two. I might come from here and catch that piece of bark on that stick to guide it up like that. Becomes more critical when you're down near the end and it's tighter and tighter, harder to navigate there. A couple other things to think about. I don't know if it's showing up, but the unwoven warp, it's so thin because I've split it. As it's drying, it's starting to cup. Weaving it takes that cup out. And so you don't want to leave that warp unwoven to dry. And so you need to, once you're in it, it's best to do as much of the weaving as you can. All of it if you can. Under two, under one, and then sometimes you can do that, just weave a little and make sure you're seeing the pattern. So it's like a herringbone brick pattern. You see this piece of bark over two, and then it staggers over one, staggers over, and just make sure you're off to a good beginning. Then the rest of it is automatic over here, unless you somehow skip your twos. And some weave this as a three-piece herringbone weave with narrower stuff than this. I've never done it, but it's fine. my brain is set on 2 and 2. I'm not gonna try to mess with that after all these years. So using that stick to just fish those out like that. The sequence I do is a little different than what my friend Nathaniel did in Alexander's book, but the pattern is the same. So there, I'm just checking it out again, making sure I got it before I leave the whole strip in. And there it is. And then moving those to the back a little more. Once you weave this one in, that one before it is a little more friendly for moving. And now I'm near the end of this strip, and it will make it across the front, across the top, with enough room left over to add one more. And you just need to keep track that you don't buckle those. This one had folded when I wove it under it, and I had to go get the stick and straighten it out. So now to suss out one more strip to finish that weft. These aren't sopping wet anymore, but it's raining, so they're not drying very fast. So at this stage I'm not adding any water to them. I'm not soaking them anymore. Hope I can finish on without doing so. Alright, so there's my overlap coming in. So I just have to be careful with the bottom of that it doesn't snag when it's coming over under here. It doesn't snag on that one, and I can do that with, whoops, I thought I could do that with that, yeah. So the part that shows is the wrong part, but that's all right. I'm not ashamed. And back on top, I went under 2, so I go under 1. Sometimes at this stage is when it gets tough. So I'm forcing it under there, trying to catch it with the stick and bring it up and pull it again. So now I'm pulling every every time it comes up. This time it'll come up way out here in this open part. I got some variation in the width of my strips. Oops. It's not terrible, it's not fatal. So right here, I don't know if this shows, but I want to pull on the top side, make sure that's taut, and then give this a yank over here. And I haven't pushed it that way in a good bit. And now that it's getting near the end, I can move these up, gain some room for another row. Now, over two. Over these two. Maybe I've gone all this way and haven't told you about the bark. This is the outside of the bark. So this surface was towards the outer bark. The underneath part is the one that was against the log. That's important because of any cupping it wants to do. It's going to cup this way, not up. Ideally, you want to minimize any cupping. And the best way to do that is to sit on it. Getting down to the last rows for now, and then when it dries you move it some more. They'll all shrink in width as they dry, and then I'll be able to take up some slack and add a row or two in each direction. So while it's wet like this, I'm not going to fit another row across the bottom because you can't weave against the rung. And I'll just get one more across the front, across the top. Just try to push that up a little. See how those move, and I can pick up a little bit of room. That. And at this point, sometimes it helps to point that a bit. And get that under there. Come up like that. And again and again. And that's over 2, so I'm done weaving there. And this, I can tuck just fit just perfect almost beside that post. So at this stage, I can't weave anymore. I don't have any more room in at the front rung to weave another row, either here on the top or on the bottom. And until these dry and shrink in width, I can't pick up that room. So now what to do? I've got a strip here that's, well, it's over 3 feet long. It's nearly 3 feet long. I am inclined to just snip that off at about 6 inches and weave it in as best I can underneath. Maybe even overlap it on the row that's under there. And then use these remnants for the filler strips that go here, because I can start putting those in now. So I'll just cut that off like that for now. And to weave these in, the pattern runs in a similar way if you read it this way. So now I'm treating the weft as a warp, and I'm weaving a strip in here. And I will, oh, it is tapered at that end, so I'll work this end, because I'll run out up near the back post. And so again, I read the last 3. I went over 2, over 1, under 2, so this goes under 1, and then it's 2 and 2, same as before, except that's upside down. So like that. And just as before, we fish it out with the stick. Except now I'm working kind of left-handed. And I want to get an approximation. I want it to run about that far. It'll, at a certain point up here, I'll just weave it in and let it die in there. So I'm going over these 2 and under these 2. And then it'll go over those 2, but I won't bring it out for that last bit. And it might come out underneath. It's wanting to come out on the top, which I don't want it to do. So push it down. No, it still wants to come out there. And this is where I think I'll get a pair of pliers. So I've gone, I don't know if this is going to show up, I've gone under the seat and pulled that out, and ultimately I'll snip it off right there, and just weaving it will keep it in place. It doesn't need to be tied. It becomes really very solidly in place upon drying. So the part that'll go underneath the front and get woven in just to seal it up is similar to what I've left over here, about maybe 6 inches ought to do it. And then another strip, well, that's a longer one, maybe that'll go over here, because here I only need a short piece. It can only go that far. So I'll use this one on the right hand side of the seat, or my right hand side. So what have I got? I have over 1 over 2, under 1 under 2, so this is over 1. Fished down beautifully. So this little piece that needs to be woven under, here's where I am perfectly willing to break the pattern, because I want it to go under this rung just to keep it in place, sort of to keep it bound. And so I don't care what the pattern is doing right there. I'll weave that one like that. That's probably sacrilege to some seat weavers, but it's fine with me. Over here, this is that extra strip I laid in for when I was doing the original weaving. And this will weave right on top of it. Tucked under there forevermore. This strip I've decided, let me see. To just weave it right on top of its previous neighbor, right like that. Well, that's enough of the seat now, especially because I only need a couple short strips there but I might get one more long strip in the front after that dries. So let it dry overnight and see what tomorrow brings. I've let the seat dry a few days. There was the day after I did it was raining, so nothing dried, and then something else happened and I got busy. But that's not a bad thing. Now it's ready to finish off. And you can maybe see the spaces that have opened up between each row of the, in this case, of the weft and of the warp, as these individual strips of bark have shrunk across their width. So I'll first start moving the warp, the one that ran front to back, and just pack them up tight against each other. So I use that stick, just a square-ended stick like that, and just tuck them over. They'll move pretty easily. And I've got the chair up in a vise on my workbench, but I will need to do the underside as well. And you see how much it moves. I've already picked up a 1/4 inch in width, and just push that over like that. You don't want, you saw me there, that started to buckle that strip, and you want to make sure you don't do that. And if it starts to, you flatten it back out. So I'll end up getting another whole strip in here by the time I get across the seat. And just like that, just proceed right along. You want to try to bring them up right next to their neighbor if you can. It'll make for a better seat in the end. There's bound to be some gaps, and they're not going to be anything to be too disturbed about. And then that one. Yeah, so I get a whole strip. So this is that extra one I added as I was weaving. And maybe I'll tear that out, or I don't know, but I want to put a full width strip right in there. So that I'm not going to move over yet. And I'll do the same thing. I push it towards the back, because you can't really push it towards the front, because the front gets wider than the back, and you wouldn't be able to move it as far. But the same notion. So I'll pack this top side, then I'll flip the chair over and do the same thing. You just have to remember when you're doing the warp from the bottom that you're going in the same direction. You don't want to push all the bottom warp that way and the top warp this way. And then I'll show you how to add the strips. To move the bottom of the seat, I just sit down and put the seat on my knees, the chair upside down, and then I've got the stick in my hands like that, just pushing them over. But do it however you can get at it. It isn't like you're there a long time doing this. Sometimes I use the thin end of this as well to give that a push there. Generally I use the thicker end, and I'm not as fussy on the bottom, but I do want to get it moved over because the strips, the extra strips, will need some room here and there. And as I said, when I was weaving, there was some liberties taken with the pattern around here. There's two things happening right there. That's that faux strip that I use just to follow the weaving, and then coming over it here is that filler strip that one of those filler strips that I might cut out. So pushing it to the back is really very straightforward. And now as the bark is drying, you see the different colors and textures from having used shaved strips and split strips. But over time it'll be fine. All blend together. Only when it's brand new that it's really very evident. And if someone doesn't like it, they won't buy it. So there I'm using the stick and my thumb to try to bring the strip up at once. So that's mostly caught up. Now I'll get this damp, particularly just in those areas. I don't need to get the middle damp. So I'll lay a cloth or a wet paper towel right here and there and here, and then try to do the same underneath. It just take 15 minutes or so to moisten that enough to be able to weave there. It's very rare for me to throw out any strips of hickory bark. So I've got some short odds and ends always hanging around that are ideal for this step. And one thing you want to keep in mind is if you wet them and dry them several times, they can get moldy, so you want to watch that. Now, same sort of principle as always applies. So I'm trying to read that pattern. And here I am what? What's this? This strip was added. So under 2, under 1, over 2, over 1. So it wants to go under these two, which means it goes over that one. And the way to double check it is find the last one that's a singleton here. That's the last singleton. The next row is under 2. It's always worth it, especially now, because this weaving is tough to do, and you don't want to have to pull it out and redo it. So I'm trying to use that stick. I should have grabbed my pliers too. There is the strip. There. How'd you come? And it has buckled that one a little. So I want to sneak under that and just flatten that out. And I only need this strip to go enough so that I can wrap it underneath and tuck it in a few rows so it stays put. So I don't need to pull this all the way across. So I'm going to get the pliers, because I might need them. So I need to go under these two. And then catch it, bring it up. That's better than last time. Pull it and repeat. Two more. And this will be the last strip. I won't be able to fit another one. So now this was that added strip I did in the initial weave, and I'm going to take it out because I can get a full width one. Remember that one tapered there. So I've wet it and it comes out easily. And it might go back in as a slightly shorter one, we'll see. But this strip I'm using will give me what I need over there. And I'll just kind of taper just the last bit of it. So, what have I got? Under one, under two, over one, you know the rest. And I buckled those strips again. I gotta watch that. I'm gonna flatten those out and pull this a little. This is one of those ones that's gonna tuck down through the seat, come out the bottom, and be dealt with underneath. Now I can get that one more strip here. So where's that one I pulled out? On the floor. So that's funny, as I'm reading this now, it's a little reversed. So going over these two like that. I have a little space here and it's a little tight there, so I can wedge that over like that. Here's where I'm going to grab it with the pliers because it's a little tough to get in there with the stick. Now I'll go over those two and go under. Then there might not be any point in coming out again over this one because there's really nowhere for it to go. So I'm just going to push down through there, try to get it to come out the bottom, and go grab it with the pliers from underneath if I need to, because that doesn't seem to work. Slat's in the way, post is in the way, everything's in the way. This one, I think I'll rethink. And I will bring that over the rung. Just for looks, it'll cover the rung. And then extend it a little like that. So I'll catch those on the bottom right now, sort them out. All right, a little change from what I was intending. That first full strip, remember I shoved it through the seat. I pulled it out instead and put it over the back rung, just so there wouldn't be a gap there showing the rung, and that'll get tucked in underneath. The next one came in beside it, gotten narrower, and tucked in front of the post, and then we'll get woven in just for a strip or two underneath. And now they'll all be tucked in here at the front, and there'll be one more narrow one that'll just go maybe 6 inches right there. Let me tuck these in and show you what that looks like. Because I packed all the warp in this direction, I only have one strip to lay in here. There I had 2.5. And so I'll be done sooner. But it's always a little tricky, fussy. These pieces aren't as wet as they might be. The seat itself, it's hard to weave these strips in. And like right here. Well, I'm gonna have to go fishing with the pliers. That was a fascinating video, I'm sure. People on the edge of their seats watching me struggle with Bach. There. But I have to do that again. Shame of it is, this is a beautiful, beautiful piece of bark. And that's as far as it's going to go. So I just pushed that in. There's a little late afternoon light for you. I just pushed that in, and I could feel it moving up there. And then I'll pull it this way. Oops. And cut it off and weave it underneath.